Okay, I think we should be live here in just a minute. Let me remind everyone to pop into that notes document that I shared in Zoom and ask you to please record your attendance under the present heading. Before we get started, are there any announcements we would like to share today? I will just thank everybody for coming to the Collab Summit last week, and also for helping to make the conference and the summit, really successful and quite a bit of fun. We're looking forward to doing that again in June. As Robin just shared, June 23rd and 24th, Austin, mark your calendars. We hope to get the call for proposals and stuff up very soon, so you can think about joining us as a speaker or sponsor or as an attendee. Let's go on to our first topic, which is the charter review for WebDriver. As a reminder, every project needs to have a project charter as part of their onboarding, and the CPC's job is to review those charters. So we have one to review on issue number 424. Christian has joined us, so maybe I'll let Christian introduce it.
Yeah, hello everyone. As you can see in the issue, there's a link to the project charter, and I pretty much aligned myself to the template that we had. And yeah, I don't know what there's to add. I was listing also the TSC members, because Miles has noted that in the governance model it says that there should be not more than 1/3 of TSC members from one company, and I was confirming that, listing the TSC members in one of the posts. Yeah, not sure what to add to this.
I could chime in that I reviewed the charter and everything, looked good for the most part. Christian, can you confirm that the one part on funding has been changed?
Yes, I think I will. Let me find the pull request for that. I removed the complete section of funding. Funding. Yeah, I have it. I can post it in the Zoom session. I removed the section on funding, on sponsorship.
Great. So just for those who haven't reviewed it, the charter references a governance doc, and that governance doc had some specific language around funding, and the project's not utilizing any sort of funding like that. So it's simpler to just remove that rather than clarify the language.
Good catch, Miles.
No problem. Everything looks great to me.
So this is going to be, one of the first charters that we review as a CPC, which is super exciting. It's a big, important step of our onboarding process. I think it's probably good to just check in really quick, so we're all on the same page about what that means to approve. Per our policy, we're approving these after there have been 2 or more approvals by voting CPC members, and the issue has been open for at least 14 days. Also assuming there's no outstanding objections and there's not been some sort of substantive change that may, want us to go to the board and to request legal review, for example, which I don't think anything in this document would raises to that level. So we're looking for voting CPC members to add their approval to this, and then after that we've got just basically a time clock. Is that everyone else's understanding as well?
I believe that was my understanding. I guess like the one thing I would want to be careful with regarding charters is because it is kind of like, you know, they are a legal document and we are chartering the responsibility from the CPC to these projects. I'm just curious if we do require whether it's a vote or something that's more explicit, because I know, for example, at the board for charter changes, they do require a motion.
Yeah, I mean, this would be a question, I think, maybe for Brian Warner to answer. I don't know if he is
Yeah, I mean,
on.
Brian can chime. I don't necessarily see it that way though, Miles. Like, I think at the board level it's a legal document, but at the project level, I don't see it as much of a legal document.
Yeah, my understanding here is that the board has empowered the CPC to manage and improve the charters of the projects. And from that perspective, essentially, it's up to the CPC to set the guidance on what should be in the charter, as well as to say, you know, what constitutes a valid charter. So, you know, I think from that perspective, really, as long as there's CPC approval of the voting members, I think that satisfies the requirement.
Yeah, but I guess the question was, can it be like a passive approval, like open 14 days without objections, or should it be a more active approval, such as like a call for a vote from voting members?
You know, I think based upon the way that the powers are delegated from the board to the CPC, I think it's up to the CPC to decide. So whatever works best with the process and whatever, you know, the voting members are comfortable with.
I mean, I'm not a voting member, but I would encourage the path of least process on this, and given that we've got so many different components of review and assessment during onboarding, that it would seem to me like it might be best to continue this approval process in the same vein that we've been doing other governance approval. But that's my 2 cents. If, you know, if somebody really felt strongly that we needed, like, for example, a voting system, you know, or a balloting system, that.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you, Jory. I think treating it as we do other governance makes sense.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me as well. Just wanted to make sure that we had that conversation. We're being explicit about it. But following the way we do any other governance for the group seems very reasonable.
Okay, super duper. It looks like verbally. Any other opinions, dissenting or otherwise, on this? All right, cool. Love paths of least resistance. So then, Christian, looks like we've got another just week and a half, and then we'll be able to tick this checkbox on your onboarding checklist.
I'm excited.
Me too. Irrationally excited about clicking checkboxes. Great. So that takes us to another charter that we get to review, which is the MOCA project charter. And Chris Hiller actually submitted this. I think this is going to be coming up on 2 weeks very soon. So actually, let's double check that. Yeah, this has been 14 days old. So let's look at this and see if it's met those requirements we just talked about. And we can check this box off for them. Okay, we certainly have, we have 3 approvals from voting members. It's been open 14 days. It's approved? Yes?
Yes, according to the governments, it should be approved by that.
Yep.
Sweet. I'm gonna leave a comment as such.
I guess one thought that I'm having right now, which isn't like a huge deal for us to think about immediately, but in general, projects likely should not be changing their charters without CPC approval. So we may want to try to figure out how to best make sure that folks are aware of that.
That's a good question. I think it's also related to another question which was raised this week at the Collab Summit, which is where do we want to encourage projects to canonically keep their project charters? And whether the CPC wants to keep a reference to those somewhere. Any thoughts on that? I'm of the opinion that they should be keeping it in. Somebody else has a thought.
No, my thought was just that perhaps projects should maintain these in their own repositories so that they're discoverable in the place where they are most likely to be looked for, but the CPC should maintain an index pointing to them.
I had a similar thought.
Hey!
I love your thought.
I like your thoughts. No, I think that probably makes the most sense, and then it also ensures that the people who are the most likely to make modifications would have commit rights to do so.
Okay, I can create an issue really quick just to capture what sounds like an action item as well, which is like to keep that reference list to project charters.
It might be worthwhile also thinking, Jory, you and I have had this conversation a few times. How do we maintain an index of who's who within the various projects? And it may be worthwhile saying, in addition to maintaining a local project charter, please also maintain or point to a list of maintainers. And we could essentially create a single point of reference for vital project data, which would be very, very helpful, I think, both at the CPC level, but also at the foundation level, just understanding who is who within the project.
Yeah, I think that would be, I think that sounds smart. It feels like accomplishing two, just because it's the same problem as, like you were saying, the list of maintainers. So yeah, makes sense to me.
Any other thoughts on it from anybody? Any thoughts from anybody on that? Is that a sensible way to do this, or?
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
It's what I would propose as well. So it makes sense to me.
I wonder, for the sake of maintaining those lists, if we could decide on like a structure where every project has some or maintains some sort of team governance in their GitHub organization, and we can grab the data from there. That's just a thought.
I mean, I certainly like the idea from the sense of it encourages consistency, but I also would want to be sensitive to the fact that some projects have very highly developed mechanisms for tracking this information, perhaps what we could provide here at the CPC level would be best practices, or if you don't have one of these lists and you are going to create one, here's what we recommend because it fits within the format of what we're looking for. But maybe without being too strict about it and requiring projects to redo something that may be working well for them in order to fit the pattern. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, absolutely.
I like the way you're framing this, Brian, and it's a great segue into the foundation-wide copyright guidance issue that I see right below.
Yes.
I really like this idea of providing a default path that people that, projects that don't need to think about can just follow, and having sort of flexibility for projects that have like special constraints.
All right. Well, that does seg, as Toby points out. I wonder, Toby, if you want to introduce this and maybe also talk a little bit about our session on this discussion at the Collab Summit. Would you like to introduce it?
I'm trying to unfry my brain. And I'm also trying to open the issue. Yeah, there's literally no way I can remember from out of the blue like this, the content of our conversation. Like, this is literally not going to work. I'm sorry. I am really jet lagged. This is literally not going to work.
That's okay. I will do my best to summarize from my own notes of the meeting. And so, and Miles was also present, as was Joe and a few others too.
Robin
So
was there too, if I remember.
yeah, so do chime in if there's
yeah, it will come back to me as soon as we start talking about it, but like literally,
okay.
like I'm completely blank.
Hey, I can relate, it's fine. So we had a focused conversation on this topic at the Collab Summit, because there, and ultimately determined that there was probably some confusion about this particular document and its relationship to the IP policy,
Okay.
which is now up on the website. Is this
Now I
ringing bell?
remember.
Okay, cool. So we wanted to get, as one of the action items from that conversation, we wanted to get some guidance from Brian and the board about whether this foundation copyright PR that Brian has authored here, is this meant to be a guide that we can easily kind of amend to provide more tactical, step-by-step instruction in some cases, or is this something that really shouldn't change? So we kind of want to understand the purpose of this document a little bit better, so that we can perhaps create the guide that we really are looking for.
Sure, that makes a ton of sense. So, couple things. So since this document is a guide versus an actual accepted document by the board of directors, I think I would be very accurate in saying our hope is that this is clear, and it may require modifications to make it clearer. Changing this does not change policy, so that's one important thing to keep in mind. So it in many senses, this is not the place to make changes if you are not comfortable with something in the IP policy. That's something which would need to go back to the board. However, this is also a way to have discussions about these things, and it's a good place to have discussions about these things so these issues can be raised in a particularly practical context. So getting to your direct question there, Jory, if there are places where the process can be clarified or can be improved, then yes, absolutely, this should be considered a living document, which can be updated and can be modified as we go through and discover maybe situations that weren't considered, or discover things which weren't practical and need to go back to the board for further consideration for possible amendments to the IP policy. This is a great place to do it. Does that make sense?
100%. Yes, this was unclear when we had a conversation about it at the meeting last week. And so having clarity there is great. What should be like the next step here? I don't think now is a good time to re-have the conversation that we wanted to have during that meeting, but couldn't because we didn't have clarity around this. should we try to discuss that on asynchronously on the issue, or like set some time up another time to talk about this? What's
Sure.
the best course of action here?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on the content of what you're asking about. So if it's about clarifying things that are already in there, let's discuss it in the issue. If it's a broader question about policy, I would say either start a new issue, or we can discuss it during, set aside time during one of the calls. It kind of
was
really
a meta. My issue was a meta issue about whether we should be prescriptive, and go really to basics about what people should, the simplest thing people should do to meet the requirements, and sort of be really focused on that, and have all of the extra bells and whistles sort of like below the fold, to take a web metaphor. If basically, so that was my desire, was for something of that nature. And my question was, well, is there agreement that this is the direction in which we should go or not? And since we didn't really have a good understanding of what this document was, weren't really able to get to a conclusion.
Okay, I gotcha. So, I mean, it sounds to me, if I were to restate what you're asking here, it's, hey, Brian, can we reorganize this to put the priority stuff up front and the stuff which would be nice to have lower down? Is that the net of it?
It's a bit more than that, is my request. I mean, I'm coming from the idea that from a developer's perspective, and I think that's true of like a small project as much as it is of a large one like AMP. People that have to handle legal-ish things just want simple instructions, and want those to be like, the experience of implementing this stuff to be as frictionless as possible and as forgettable as possible. And so my goal would be that such a document would basically bear that in mind in terms of like how it is actually structured, and what's actually that it'd be really prescriptive in terms of, here are the 3 things that you have to do, here's how you have to do them, and if you do this, you're done.
I got you. So I think I think it makes a ton of sense. We could put a summary on the summary, essentially, of
that's one way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense. I am totally good with that from my perspective.
So I'm happy to work with you on that, like even separately, if you want to do a call on this and work together in the document to try to figure out what needs to go where,
Sure.
and then modify that accordingly and bring it back to the CPC if this is something people will be comfortable with.
I would be more than happy to do that. Everybody else, what do you think? Any questions or concerns about this?
I think that sounds great. Just kind of, collaborating on it in that way, and then also, that bringing it back so people can make sure that in this next sort of version that the guide is really answering the questions that they have, which I think is really what we're getting to here. So would be thrilled for y'all to do that.
Yeah, Miles did mention during that meeting that FAQ would be an interesting way of looking at it. And I think that, the way you're framing that, Jory, actually makes me think of that again. So I think that's a good piece of, thing to use when we work on this.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, sounds like we've got a good an answer we needed and a next step there. So assuming there are no other comments or thoughts or concerns from our own Motley Peanut Gallery, we can move on to the next issue, which is number 413. Add a copy of the contributor covenant COC text. And let me just go. I think this is Emily's, who is not going to be able to make it today. Eventually, yeah. So you can see if our notes from the last conversation.
So I can provide a quick context here if you want.
Yes, please.
Yeah, basically, we were discussing some of the requirements that that having an escalation process in the COC put on the COC itself, and how we wanted to handle this, and basically that sort of pointed to the COC should be in line, so we can actually make those modifications on the COC itself. And we also had the discussion the day before in the meeting where Robin was there. I've been mixing the two meetings in my head. I think we sort of arrived at some conclusion that it would be good to have one document for the whole foundation that would be on the foundation's website, was an easy way to be able to make reports from there. But then we also discussed like moderation techniques that Node was doing. So there's sort of like a lot of different parts to the COC conversation that are sort of like connected to one another. And I don't think we really we have agreement around this.
Yeah, I would Giuseppe here. Sorry, I was a little bit late. I'd concur with that, Toby. I think that we have like a few aspects to this that we need to work through. You know, where the COC is and how the projects either link to it or refer to it or what have you, and reporting and moderation. And we had some good discussions with some folks who were deeply intimate with the Node policies and how they would need to change if we were to think about things like, you know, cross foundation banning and you know, escalation and you know, a variety of things. And so if I'm not mistaken, the idea was to form some sort of panel. I don't know if it's the actual code of conduct panel yet, or moderation team, or however you'd call it, or if it's just a team to start, you know, hashing through this, you know, maybe some meetings specific to it.
Joe, if I can make a really quick point of order here. I think that we're spiraling a bit from like the specific issue that's on the agenda though, because the issue that's on the agenda is very specifically about whether or not the contributor code of covenant text is in line or if we have a pointer to it.
Yeah.
These other issues are important code of conduct issues, but the issue that's on the agenda right now was specifically about whether or not we were going to maintain the full text or whether or not we were going to point to the text upstream.
Yeah, I agree. And sorry to digress with some context. That I was going to circle back to that I think we should address this issue and then you know, take this to a larger you know, group meeting, whatever, working group.
And you know, one person who's been just really detail oriented on this is Emily, and unfortunately he's not here. So I would definitely want, I'd be excited for him also to participate in next steps. So this may be, unfortunately, an issue that we kind of need to table until more of our colleagues can be present to assemble that group of people who may want to figure meat and potatoes out. But I also don't like the idea of not having an action item here. So
If I may, oh, sorry. So, okay, so I agree with Miles that like this is like, you know, we're sort of digressing away from the issue, but I don't see how we can actually make a decision between the, you know, the inline or not, or where that is, until we have like a better sense of how this group is supposed to function. like, you know, how this whole thing is supposed to function more broadly, and sort of
I don't agree with that.
Okay.
I think it's very simple. Like the text that exists right now for the contributor code of covenant requires slight augmentations, such as adding the email addresses of who to contact, as well as possibly a small bit of text stating that the code of conduct applies to individual project spaces that just don't exist in the upstream version. Further, there may be small tweaks that we want to make that while we do want to upstream them, we may need to fork temporarily to be able to land them within our own code of conduct. We shouldn't have to wait for an upstream speed to land it. Further, you know, I think when we're talking about things happening upstream, I think we're pretty safe to assume that that repo is never going to vanish, but it does seem like an unreasonable risk for us to take if we don't need to. I see just putting the full text into our repo as fairly uncontroversial. And to me, that would be the recommendation that I would make. I think all these other things that we're talking about are great, and we need to work on it in line in the proposal. I think there's, as far as I can tell, only been one person who's really pushed super hard that they want us to only have a reference and not the full text. But to me, I think it seems pretty obvious we just need the full text.
Yeah, and if I could just chime in really quickly, the contributor covenant that we're linking to says that you should do that. So I think that, like Miles said, it's pretty uncontroversial. I think we should, you know, maybe hash it out in the issue real quickly, move forward, and then let the larger group, you know, work on other aspects.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I was sort of, you're right that this is the right next step.
I'm going to add a comment just kind of about that, and you know, recommending that we have it in line.
Yeah, I think very simply the fact that they request that you do that seems to me imply that we should not be linking to it.
Yep.
Agreed.
Cool. We can take it back to the issue, I think.
All right. Awesome. That was number 413. We move down the list to number 411, which is kicking off an OpenJS Foundation project landscape. This actually was one we had thought, oh, well, we'll visit about this in person during the collab summits. And I think, honestly, there were so many other conversations. This wasn't a thread that we picked up during the collab summit, at least not that I'm aware of. So does anybody want to kind of summarize for the group where we are in our on this topic?
I believe this one's still under discussion. Yeah. I had a very brief, probably 15-second discussion about it during the conference. But other than that, I think we're still in discussion phase.
Anything we need to, any questions we need to try and poke for answers on?
I think the main questions, as I understand them, are how do we present this, and how do we represent the scope of this? I would note that the various accessibility concerns that were raised have been addressed with a recent push. In fact, it was addressed upstream within the project itself, the landscape project itself, and that addresses some of the contrast issues, as well as the fact that there were no alt tags on the images. So those are, I believe, resolved at this point. It's really more a question of how do we position it, and what do we include, and how much do we aspire to include in it over time.
And I think those are probably threads we should keep up in the issue, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. I think it makes sense. Yeah.
All right. Let's move down to number 409, which is just GitHub admin. So I'm pretty sure that this issue can be closed because per our conversation about what we wanted in terms of two-factor authentication and you know, the heightened privileges for all members of the CPC, I did take care of those action items. So unless there's something I've missed, I think this can be closed.
Agreed.
All right. Closing the issue.
Beautiful.
All right, moving then to number 405. This was another action item that I self-assigned. I still have an outstanding obligation here to make some changes, which I just flat out apologize for not having done yet. So there's no update, but I'll try and get this taken care of so that the issue can be closed at our next meeting. And we're already reviewing charters as noted earlier, so we're in pretty good shape. All right. Number 400, point of contact for onboarding. I believe someone issued a pull request.
Yeah, Mike did. It's issue 422.
Okay, so let's go take a look at number 422. There haven't been any comments on it, so I'm supposing that probably most people haven't had a chance to take a look at this.
There's not much to it.
Yeah.
Basically, you know, adds a bullet point for be available as primary point of contact through the incubation period if reached, and then 2 process action items to publish project charter on website or GitHub, and champion remains the point of contact with CPC, but also document project and foundation contacts for, and then the 3 subsequent contact points.
Well, this seems really straightforward to me, and I think it does the job of clarifying that, at least in the process piece. But let me ask others if they feel it does. I mean, we're here because our intent, you know, our intentions didn't quite match our words. So, is this as clear as it needs to be?
Yeah, it is. I'm not sure about the 2 changes in the actual checklist for the process, for the onboarding process. I mean, I'm not sure whether those are part of the same document.
Oh,
The
you
same
mean in the
commit? Sorry.
So this just changes project progression and it does not change the onboarding template. So we would need to update the template too.
Well, yes, but I'm actually wondering why. I mean, yeah, I don't think that these changes are warranted on the checklist. That's what I meant. Like, I think they just add a bit of confusion. This is the only thing I meant.
Yeah, I agree. I think the checklist parts are unnecessary.
So perhaps just this first line on line 40, and that is all needed, and the others are.
I mean, one is like unnecessary, and the other one actually muddies the water a bit. It puts the you know, it's sort of strange.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Okay, so so the changes on line 100 and 107 are not needed, but line 40.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I
okay.
think 100 is perhaps, Mike was just noticing that all of the other bullet points are, begin with kind of the verb, the action, whereas
Mhm.
this implementation is sort of, different, which I understand
Yeah, that
doing
works.
resumes and stuff.
Okay. Well, that seems straightforward. Then I think we can probably document that, and I'm sure Mike will be happy to make those changes quickly, or somebody else can kind of can add those as suggested commits, and that would be super. We can probably button this one up.
Yep.
Groovy. All right. Moving down to number 398, onboarding meta questions. My favorite kind of questions. Existential questions are my favorite kind of questions, but also meta questions. I believe that we answered this. This issue can be closed, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and my comment from 14 days ago says that Michael Dawson will update COC proposal to advise there, but otherwise we will not be explicit in terms of naming conventions for the COC.
So I think because we at least had those we had this conversation and at least kind of are all on the same page about the answers, that this issue itself can be closed, but we do want to, yeah, it's my,
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna close it. Groovy, we've closed 3 issues today, y'all. I'm so psyched. Post-graduation checklist.
It sounds like a party.
It does. It's like, we're gonna graduate. I have those cap and gowns for everybody. Toby, this is yours. You wanna
Yeah, I think I have a
describe?
few things that I actually need to fix that have been requested be fixed, and that I haven't done. So maybe I should do that.
What have you been
Come
doing
back
for the
next
last week or more?
Sorry, what?
What have you been doing for the last week or more? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I don't know. It's I was partying in Montreal, so
Yeah.
that's what happened. In a conference center.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Inexcusable. Just kidding. All right, we will move on and not tease Toby any longer to number 379. Move COC proposal to stage 3. And this is certainly adjacent to that other discussion we were having just a little bit ago. So we are waiting for the conclusion of 413 to take action here. So I'm not sure there's any action to take at the moment. Is that
Yeah.
everyone else?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Finish your thought if I am.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't, we had a lot of discussions around the code of conduct and moderation and all that stuff. I wonder if this should remain where it is until we really kind of flesh this out further.
I would go further. I actually think we should consider downgrading it to stage 1.
Yeah.
We don't have consensus.
Yeah. Or and maybe even break it up into different areas of concern, moderation, reporting, documentation, those kinds of things. But still, I concur with Miles.
Like stage 2
what
is supposed to be a signal that we're done discussing it and it's ready for the board to review. And I do not have the feeling like we're there right now, unless we want to move forward with this proposal and iterate on it. But, my impression from the last couple of conversations that we've had is that it's potentially even a broader need, A, to make sure that the policies that we have down are what we want to move forward with, and B, ensuring that projects have been actively consulted on what's going to happen here, since it will, affect them.
Yeah, and I believe that keeping it in the proposal process is probably better because it's such a broad array of things to work through that that might be a better place to kind of iterate on things.
Will we have as next steps here figuring out how to form a group that's going to be working on these issues?
I mean, yeah, another possibility would be spinning up a team, like a code of conduct working group, specifically focused on having out-of-band meetings to work on this.
Yeah, I think that's necessary.
I don't think it's moving forward just the way it is working right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there were a lot of good conversations and there were a lot of, a few people volunteering. I think we should move forward on that and get progress here.
Yeah, we also have 3 new projects who have joined the incubation program since this proposal started, all of whom have, their own background in moderation and feelings about this.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, should we create an issue to, create a code of conduct working group and
alternatively, we could just spin up a repo and have people join that want to participate, similar to what we did with standards.
Great.
Any strong feelings one way or the other? I'm comfortable with either approach on Miles and Joe.
Yeah, I mean, even both could work an issue to create the repo, but I think just doing the repo makes sense. I mean, maybe an issue to kind of raise visibility as well, but yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just make the repo with a decent README with goals, as well as like a issue that points to it, so people are aware that it was created. Seems like a great way to start.
Yep.
Yeah, it would be good to have one of the goals to have encourage more women to participate in this issue as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can count on Nana from the AMP team, that's for sure.
Great.
Great.
One thing I am wondering is if it's better to wait until the new year to kick this off. It's like when you start a new thing, you usually get like new energy going. So if we kick it off right now and then everyone vanishes and then comes back, it does introduce a risk of it just kind of stalling.
Yeah, so maybe let's make an issue just so that, I mean, not that this is going to be forgotten, but, that way it's definitely on the agenda and we just jump back on it once we meet again.
Seems reasonable.
+1.
+1.
All right, I can create that issue if we want.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe.
Yep.
We are 4 minutes to the top of the hour. So I think this next issue will probably be our last for time. And that is clarify travel fund status and process, number 377. The issue of clarity around the travel fund, and sort of how it would be managed and what we need to do, was also one that was raised at the Collab Summit as being a case we should clarify for our colleagues. I picked a bad time to start eating a Starburst, I'm sorry. So I'm not sure that Jonah has had any further time to work on the proposal he was developing, but I think we're pretty close. And one of the things we talked about, we being like Mateo and James and Joe and a handful of other people, was we just really need to do the next step here. Oh, and Rich, which is like kind of transfer the process that currently exists over to the foundation. So I think on this front, we really just need maybe a volunteer to kind of do the administrativa. Joe, does that match what you recall from our session as well?
Yeah.
I can take this up since I'm I know Jonah and I can circle back to him if I have questions. So I can share you this.
Great. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Christian. Okay, so with that volunteer, and with now 2 minutes left, I don't know that any of the remaining issues are coverable in 2 minutes. Is there any other business to bring forward to the CPC today?
I would like to bring forward some important business of thanking everyone for all the hard work they've done this year and what a great job they did with the event and the Collab Summit. And I'm just really grateful to get to collaborate with all of you.
Plus one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Totally
second
agree.
that. Absolutely. What a great bunch of folks you all are. Oh, really?
Very adorable, Miles. I think here's a question. There were a number of different groups collecting notes and things from the Collab Summit. Do we want to suggest compiling those and putting them all in one spot? I'm thinking especially about the notes from different CPC sections, which others may want to have access to. Where would we like to start to put those?
Yeah, I have some notes. Jory, I assume you have some as well. I wonder who else has notes. Maybe we should just get together on an off meeting and combine them, figure out the different areas or something.
Yeah, and maybe in the Collab Summit channel on Slack, we can just figure that out really quick. But if you took notes from the summit and you want to share them, pop in there and let's figure out where we want to keep them for historical purposes.
Sounds good.
Cool. I'm going to close our YouTube. Which, how does that work? You just click end, stop live